So today we're going to be talking about 5 ways that you can leave a legacy for your children or grandchildren. And this does not involve money. Coming up next. Hi everybody, my name is Dee Burks and this is Retirement Rescue, where we talk about how to make money, save money, and create a retirement from nothing. Well, one of the things that I've been talking about in my little series on leaving a legacy or leaving something behind is how to leave meaningful things behind for your children. And in a previous video, I had talked about writing a memoir, writing down your stories. But if you're not someone who really wants to write stories down, or you've already written your stories down, let me give you 5 more ideas of ways you can leave a legacy for your family members. Now, the first of these is to write down your family traditions. And this is beyond the traditions that you have with your children, the ones they remember. Write down the holiday and family traditions you remember from your grandparents and great-grandparents. Those may be some things that you no longer do or things you no longer include, but your children will want to know if that is part of their family legacy. Did you all used to have a Yule log? Did you all have oysters in your dressing instead of giblets? You know, sometimes it's small things or things we think are insignificant. But when you talk about family traditions, this is an important part of their history, their legacy. If your grandparents, you had some that grew up on a farm like mine did, there was a lot of family get-togethers to preserve food and canned food and harvest festivals that involved several families. They weren't like city festivals we see today. They were family traditions that people got together and did. And so write those down. You know, you may not have included them in your memoir because they're things you don't really do anymore. But they're important for your family to document and have as part of your legacy. Number 2 is skills. There are so many traditional skills or skills we have that aren't passed on to our children, our grandchildren. And the cool thing about these skills now is you can leave them a video. You can write it down. You can explain what you do. And let me give you some examples. My grandmother taught me to quilt years ago. I added to that skill set and even taught quilt classes at one time. And that's a tremendous skill set. My daughters don't know anything about it. So that's something I want to leave for them, is information on how the quilts that I hand down to them were created. Information on things that my grandmother told me and the way they did friendship quilts back in the 30s. And all of that legacy needs to be left for my girls. Another thing that's really getting a resurgence as far as interest from younger generations is gardening. And let me tell you what, there is a huge difference in gardening because yes, there's a lot of information online, but let me tell you what, traditional knowledge of how to garden and how to grow things is invaluable. It shortens that learning curve. It explains to them what you do and why. And it's very different if you grew up in Texas versus if you're trying to garden on the Front Range of Colorado. Very different. So if you have a skill set like that, you need to leave that behind for your children. If you are an artist, if you work in metalwork, you're a spur maker, any of those traditional arts and crafts, you need to leave for your children so they can understand how to carry that on when they finally have an interest way down the road and you may be gone. So share those traditional skill sets. Number 3 is family photos. And I've touched on this in a few different videos, but let's talk in depth about family photos. I've always said you need to identify the people in the family photos. This is important because your children are not going to know who those people are. And while you may recognize those people, your children may have only met those people when they were in their 70s or 80s. They don't recognize them in their 20s. which may be that photo. They also probably going to be photos of people your children have never met, don't even know who they are. And so, yes, it is important to write those down. Now, if you don't want to write on the back of a photo, as a lot of people don't these days, you don't want to write on the back of the photo, number those photos and keep a list of who is in the photo, where they are in the photo, where the photo was taken, and what the relationship of all those people are. Do more than just leave a name. One of the mistakes that many of our ancestors made was they just put a name on the photo, and you're like, well, that's great, but I don't know when that was taken, where it was taken, and I have the name of the person, but know nothing else about them or who they are or how the people in this photo are connected. So leave as much information as you can. Was this photo taken at a wedding? Was this photo taken at a funeral? Was this photo taken at a family get-together during the holidays? When was it taken? Where was it taken? Why are all these people in this photo? That is great information for your children to have. And it's also great if you digitize these photos, which of course you absolutely should do. It's great to have the original photo, especially if they're old photos or tintypes. But you want to keep those in a safe location, and you can scan them in, identify everyone, and share those with other family members, even if they all can't share the original. Number 4 is family recipes. And you know the ones I'm talking about, those handwritten recipes that had stains all over them, that your grandma used all the time. Those traditional family recipes you should keep, whether you still make those dishes or not. And I would encourage you to scan those in their original form, but also have a typewritten version. Not everyone's handwriting can be easily read. And honestly, some of the instructions are super confusing. But those family recipes are treasures. And you've seen people, I'm sure, take these family recipes, the handwritten ones, and turn them into hand towels and little posters, which you can do with all the print-on-demand companies that you have now. You can get on Printful or any of those companies and turn those into really great keepsakes for your kids and grandchildren. But you want to be sure to keep those original recipes and scan them in. And then if there's some explanation that goes along with that recipe, then you can provide it. Let me give you an example of this. My grandma was notorious for writing down, here's your recipe, just the ingredients, not what order they should be in, not mixed dry versus wet. These were things that people just assumed everyone knew back then, because everyone cooked. Well, today they don't. So you might need to explain a little bit of that. She would also call butter oleo. She always called butter oleo. It didn't matter if it was oleo or if it was butter. She called it oleo. So some of those things need explanation. She would also give the instruction at the end of the recipe, cook in a hot oven till done. Yeah, that's not super helpful. What's a hot oven? What temperature is that? How long do you cook it? What does she mean by, quote, done? You may need to explain those things, but that is why those original recipes are such a treasure, because the way people described recipes back in the day is way different than now. There isn't all the instruction because the assumption was everybody had this base knowledge. Well, over the last couple of generations, that base knowledge has disappeared. And we don't share the same lingo, but it makes those old-timey recipes a real treasure. Now, I will say there's a really interesting story from our family. In 1979, my Aunt Lill, and by the way, anyone who is raised in Texas, I think, has an Aunt Lill and or an Aunt Paula. I happen to have both. But this was Aunt Lill, and when I say Aunt Lill, I have several Aunt Lills because it's a family name. The Aunt Lill I'm talking about was my grandmother's aunt. She grew up in the Cumberland Gap region, as all the family did before they moved to Texas. But she had an article published in the Mother Earth News in 1979, and it was called Growing Up on a Mountain Homestead. And she talked about how they churned butter, how they made their clothes, how the families got together to preserve food, dehydrate food, process pigs, get ready for winter. It was really interesting. And it's really even more interesting now because so few people live like that. Even though homesteading has really come back, the people with that kind of knowledge are rare. And so the fact that she took the time to write it down is huge. It's also huge that she got it published. I'll give her props for that one because that's not easy. But she got it published, and it's really been a treasure for our whole family. Everybody has copies of that article because it is such an insight into the daily life of people back in the late 1800s or right around the turn of the century, 1900. So it's really, really interesting. Number 5, handwrite out as much of your family tree as possible. Yes, there are great websites like Ancestry and all kinds of family tree websites, which are great, but they tend to be expensive. Not all your family members have access to them, and having something handwritten by you can give a lot more information than just the names and dates and things that are on some of those websites. And honestly, because other family members may have done that family tree that exists, if one exists, some of the information may be completely wrong. And so you want to really handwrite as much as you know and leave that for your kids. And also, if you want to put it online, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that. And share it with as many people as possible. But you want to handwrite what you know, document everything that you have, so your children can then later do whatever with it to share with other family members down the road. But be sure you write out as much as you know. You may think, well, other people know this. No, they don't. And as people die off, that knowledge doesn't get passed along. And eventually all you have are name, birth, death. You know nothing about them. What did they do? Where did they move from and to? Tennessee, Texas, whatever. While you can find that on census records, you can't find the whys. What did they do when they got to Texas? On the census record, it says farmer. Well, what did that mean? You know, you can add a lot to your family history by writing those things down. And if that's all you do, that is still leaving a fabulous legacy for your kids that you've written down in your own words and your own handwriting. So these are 5 ways that you can leave a legacy that don't cost a lot of money, but will have tremendous meaning down the road for future generations. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, please click subscribe, and I'll see you next time.